Good morning, listeners. We are kicking off 2024 with a podcast that I have been anxiously awaiting and anticipating, um, with expectation of how this story was going to be told today. So, I know we're talking about new starts. We're talking about ways that God has worked in our lives. And as you know, if you followed us, that Andra has had a journey that has been atypical of most people. But it has not been just a physical journey. It has been quite the emotional, but even more so spiritual journey. And that's what we're going to camp on today, is to see what all God has done in her life, to see what we can learn through the journey that she has been on, and just to be able to celebrate with her, not only what God has done in her life, but through her life that now impacts us. So, Andra, welcome back.
I know. It's so exciting to be here. And we're kind of in a new venue. So
we are in a new venue. We are in our new home office.
I know. And it's great. Like it's not the basement anymore. It's like light and pretty and great. So we're excited. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, God has truly blessed us this year in so many ways. And the podcast is one that has been wonderful. Our team has come together to interview other people. So, go back and listen to some of the old ones if you haven't caught up. You still have time to do that. But this is kind of our launch for 2024. And I really could not think of a better way to launch 2024.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thanks.
Catch us up, because the last episode we had, you were kind of telling us about your heart issue. So if for those who have not heard, catch us, bring us up to speed.
Okay. So I have a genetic heart condition that had led to cardiomyopathy, which is basically the enlarging of the heart and the weakening of the heart muscle to the point it does not pump properly. With that came a lot of arrhythmias, a lot of really fast rhythms of the heart that were dangerous and sometimes could be fatal had I not had a pacemaker defibrillator. But my electrophysiologist had said, look, you're a ticking time bomb, basically. Like, we've got to get this heart out and get the other one in. You need to go on transplant list. And so he presented to Emory. And I guess that's kind of where we had left off, maybe, was that we were in that process of going through Emory. And I don't know. I want to start by just saying this to just anybody who's listening. Do you know about the red balloon theory? Like, if you have one balloon, somebody's going to say, well, I have two. Like, it's just kind of like, sometimes you meet those people in this world who, like, if you're like, oh, I've had a heart transplant, they're going to be like, oh, well, I've had a heart and lung transplant. They're always going to have one more balloon. Always.
The one-uppers.
Right, yes. Okay. And I just want to start by saying, like, this is not a red balloon story. Like, I feel like my story is very, like, everybody can relate to it. I don't feel like transplant is any different than any other giant that someone's facing, if that makes sense. So this is not I have two red balloons story. This is, I have a red balloon just like everyone else has a red balloon. So I really want to make that clear before we start, because sometimes you can be listening to this and think, how can transplant apply to me? Like, how can this girl's journey apply to me? But I think everyone has a Goliath to face in their life, and this just happens to be mine. So
y'all are hearing the humbleness of Andra Pape at this moment, because of all that she's been there through that we could not even imagine. And this is part of the way that you just said was beautifully stated, because that has been the heart of you, even from the very beginning, was you were already praying for the nurses and the doctors that they would know Jesus.
Yes.
And even today, when you're like, oh, it's, you have your own journey, I have mine, we're not going to compare because each of our journeys are hard.
Yes. And so,
but yours has been,
it was a lot.
Atypical is like the mildest way to put this.
I will say it was a lot. We started with Emory, and I've been seen by doctors at Emory for over 25 years and loved them, loved my doctors, felt very safe there. And that was, I think, the first change in this journey that really threw me for a loop with having to go to God, is that immediately my insurance said that I could not have transplant at Emory, that I had to have it at Vanderbilt, which, for those of you who don't know, that's like in Nashville. So it's 5.5 hours away on a good traffic day. And it just, devastated me. I mean, I cried for days. Like I couldn't pull it together because it was so scary to think about going to a new hospital and starting the process over again. Like, Emory had approved me, but that didn't mean that Vanderbilt would. And so we had to go up there for the same testing that I had at Emory. And it was a lot. And I remember just crying on the phone one day and crying with my parents and talking with them about it. And my dad has had this quote, and he has said it for years, that sometimes what seems like the biggest hurdle or the biggest devastation is God's biggest blessing. And he was like, you just have to remember that. Like, you don't know what your future is, but God does. And I was like, okay, you're right. And it
and
really
come from your daddy.
I know,
was
I
big.
know, I know. And he's so great about that, and being able to just really, he's a calming presence. And my mom and I are not. Like, we're both the panickers. We're like, and Dad's like, okay, ladies. He's had years of practice with all of us. So he's like, just calm down. Let's talk about this. So, but it did turn out that Vanderbilt was absolutely 100% like the place that God wanted me at and needed me at. And I realized that it was completely God ordained that I went there, because on so many levels, it's the number one transplant hospital in the world.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, I mean, to stay at Vanderbilt, like you never go without hearing a helicopter at least every 10 to 15 minutes. It's insane. They transplant so many different organs, but their heart transplant program is huge. It's I think number one in the nation. So it's amazing. And we went there, had our testing. They said, yes, you're absolutely a candidate. And the first thing that the doctor said was, you would have never gotten a heart through Emory. Their program just isn't big enough because of Emory's great. Don't get me wrong. I love Emory. I still love Emory, but their heart transplant program is just not large enough to handle the volume of transplant recipients on their list, or the ones that are waiting. So it's just a huge reassurance, the first meeting that we had at Vanderbilt, to be told, this is where you need to be. But to put this from a God perspective, going into that was really learning that I felt like I was preparing for a battle. And I felt like I had to prepare for that battle. And I've realized, they always say with the devil, if you ask like any Christian, like, what is the devil's biggest lie? Do you know what the devil, like, what would you say?
That you're all alone.
Okay, that is a good one. But his biggest lie is that he's not real. Like, that's his biggest lie.
God's not real?
No, the devil, because if the devil's not real, then God's not real. So that's one of the devil's biggest lies, is I don't exist. Because if you don't think I exist, then you don't think God exists. Like, have you not?
Okay, I have not heard that. That is very
I've heard that my entire life. Is one of the devil's biggest lie is that he doesn't exist. And
okay, I can totally see how that would help you justify a lot in your life.
Right. And that if he doesn't exist, God doesn't exist, there's no spiritual realm.
Okay.
But I feel like that is really for non-Christians. I feel like for Christians, kind of what you said, his biggest lie is you can do this on your own. Like, that you can handle this situation. Because if he can get us focused on our earthly abilities to try to handle anything, we always fall apart. Like, we're not built for that. Like, we're built to seek God. And it took me a hot minute during this process to realize, like,
wow,
I have to seek God. I have to, like, he is the only way I'm going to make it through this. Like, emotionally, like, I can't handle this by myself. I am going to have to lay some things down at his feet that I was clinging to. And one of those was just fear. Just fear of the whole process. I was terrified. I did not know how to fight this battle in peace, if that makes sense. I did not know how to do that. And so I literally had to cling to 2 Chronicles 20:15, which is, do not be discouraged or afraid because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours, but God's. And I had to keep clinging to that God is the one who's fighting our battles. And we don't always know what that looks like. I'm not saying that just because God fights our battles, it's going to turn out the way we want. But we have to come to a point where we trust God enough to know that whatever happens is his will, and that it's going to be okay because God ultimately is control of the situation. And I really had to lay that down. I remember the night that we got the call at like 10:30 at night that it was the craziest thing. I picked up the phone, and it was a nurse from Vanderbilt, and she just said, "I'm Miss Pape. How are you doing?" It's like, fine. And she was like, "How are you feeling this week?" And I literally, like, my nerves just overrode my Southern niceness. And I was like, "Are you calling me about a heart?" Like, I literally didn't even like answer the question, because I was just like, what? And she was like, if you're not sick and you haven't had any issues this week, I'm calling you about a heart." And I was like, okay, I'm not sick. Nothing's happened. Like, I'm fine. And so, she shared with us a little bit about the donor, which I'm not 100% sure I'm ready to share that yet. Because I haven't reached out to the donor's family yet, because we have to wait 6 months. But she just shared a little bit about her journey, and that she was on life support, and we did not have to leave until the next morning, which is normally not the case. Normally you get the call and it is, you jump in, and we had our bags packed like a pregnancy, like, like we were ready to go to the hospital, because we were, any minute we carried those bags with us. But I was only on the transplant list for 4 days, which was crazy. And
This is a miracle.
I know, in and of itself, that is a miracle. Like, when I went into the transplant program, when I was logged in, I was the only B positive blood type in their donor, or in their recipient group. And so it just went really fast for me. But they also told me it will go fast because you're at Vanderbilt, and they just get so many hearts that it's going to go fast. But I remember that night talking to you, and like,
Yeah, I was no help. I was no help. You
You
called me,
were.
it was like 11 o'clock, and for some odd reason, I was laying in bed watching TV with my phone on my stomach. I mean,
Right.
otherwise I would have had it turned off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I answered that call, like, I knew
I know.
when my dream came up, and I was no help. Like, I lost it.
You were.
I lost it. I had to leave my bedroom and go into another room because I was crying so hard. And I didn't say this that night, but I'll tell you now what I was going through my friend is I was so afraid that was going to be the last time I heard your voice.
I know. I was terrified of the same thing.
Yeah.
Trust me.
We weren't going to say it.
No.
But it was like, I was so afraid that the what if, and it was like fear just got a hold of me. And I felt so bad when I hung up. I didn't have a scripture to quote. I didn't have any, like, and we prayed.
We did. And that was so great. And I understand that. Like, I had already, like, I was a emotional basket case too. So, but like I said, you kept saying, like, you're so brave, you're so brave. And I was like, I'm not brave. I feel like Jonah, or like, that God is just like, there was no other way to go except forward. In fact, when they called, they said, you can accept or decline this heart. And like, for half a second, I was like, should I decline it? And I was like, no, you can't decline. But I was that scared that it's like the thought flittered through my head of like, maybe I want to take the next one. Like, I'll just take the next bus. It'll be fine. Like, let's kick this can down the road a little bit. But I did not, which again was good and God. But also very much like the next day in the hospital waiting we had to get there at like 11:30 that morning. I don't think I got the transplant until a little after midnight. So even though September 13th is considered like my transplant day, I really didn't get the heart until September 14th. So I kind of count both of those days as my transplant anniversary.
It was very interesting that they did it overnight.
I know.
In the middle of the night.
I know. And my surgeon who came, just side topic, he has surgical rights at Vanderbilt, but he actually works at a children's hospital. And he just does these for funsies. Just for funsies. He just likes transplants. So it's just what he likes to do. And I'm like, I can't imagine. Like, that is like so scary. And he is that brilliant that this is what he does to have a fun challenge, which I'm just like, okay, all right, well, that's great. But he was amazing.
And our prayer usually when people are going into surgery is, God, the night before, like, let them have a good night's sleep, let them be rested and fed. And we're going, they're doing this overnight. He hasn't slept. We haven't been able to pray that he hasn't slept. Okay, God, you're totally just took everything that was our control or safety
Yes.
and threw everything to the
Threw it
air.
completely out.
Everything.
I mean,
from your family being there to like
yes.
everything.
I mean, it was crazy. And it was a mad dash to get up there. Like, I did not sleep at all. I think Ryan probably got like 2 or 3 hours the night before. And then finally at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was just like, both of us were awake and we couldn't sleep. And he was like, let's just get up and go. Like, let's just go. And again, like, God showed up in so many ways. Like, we were able to find an apartment, like it was like a bungalow house that had been broken up into 3 apartments in East Nashville, which is a really cool area. If you ever guys get up there, it's like a really neat kind of bohemian area. And the apartment wasn't even listed yet. The guy said, I'm still 2 months away from being able to list it. And he just, all in God's timing, just agreed to list it to us. And so we had places for people to sleep while they were up there during my transplant. It was just a huge God thing. But yeah, so got the transplant September 13th. It has been a little over 3 months. There was a lot. This first 48 hours after transplant were pretty intense.
How long did the transplant
the surgery
itself?
I think around 8 or 9 hours. So I think they all got to see me the next day around, I want to say 9 or 10. It's all a huge blur for me. I should have asked Ryan. Because I know he was updating the caring page, but I haven't gotten to the point where I can read those yet. And I can't. He has pictures of me. Like, when you first wake up, you're still intubated. And I, like, in my mind's eye, like how I saw it, I thought it was strapped around my face. Like, I thought it was clamped. I thought it was this huge black, but it was none of that. It was just like a little tube. And, but I saw it completely different, because I woke up with a bit of delirium, which is something that happens in patients that are given, I think, Dilagnum, some kind of like heavy pain med. So those first 48 hours were kind of crazy. I remember people coming in. I remember being very aggressive. I remember my mom trying to adjust one of my masks, and I was just like pushing her away because I was convinced in my head that only the nurses could do it. I don't know. It's just really weird. But even during that time, I was completely delirious. At one point, like, my entire hand, it did not swell, but I saw it swell. Like, I saw like swell, like cartoon character swell. Like, and I was screaming that like my hand was going to explode, and the nurse was trying to calm me down. Wow. He was so amazing. His name was JT. And if I could give a shout out to all of those nurses, they were just incredible. But he was just like, honey, we're just gonna cover that hand. We're just gonna cover that hand with the blanket. We're not gonna look at it because you're in delirium and your brain needs to not see that. So we're just gonna cover it. And I was like, okay. And a God thing in that one story was just that my dad had surgery in March and had 3 weeks of delirium. I mean, it was awful. And up until that point, I did not know it existed. I did not know what it was. I did not know this was something that could happen after surgery. So when JT, the nurse, was talking to me, I was able to rationally say, okay, this is what happened to Dad.
Awesome.
And because I knew about it, I knew that what he was saying was true. Okay. Had I not had that knowledge, I don't think I would have believed the nurse that my hand wasn't swelling. And I just think that that's just the incredible thing, and that God just used, because during that time when Dad was having delirium and Mom was exhausted and we were all trying to take care and just find some way to help him, it was exhausting, and it didn't seem like anything good was going to come out of that. And then you fast forward to 6-7 months later, and that one incident has tied into my life of being able to calm me down in a moment of complete panic. At the time when I had the hand swelling and all of that, I also, don't ask me, I can't explain it. I also kept seeing blood all over the wall, and the blood would like seep into the wall, and then it would leave these horrible, scary looking faces. And So I just started praying. I was just like, God, like, I know that you are in this room and there's nothing in this room that's not of you. And if there is, get it. But I was doing like an entire sermon in my head. Like, I remember like being like just preaching to myself on God's faithfulness and his faithfulness to meet us where we are and to carry us through those situations when everything is completely out of your control. God shows up. Mm-hmm. And I know he's always there. I just think sometimes we don't look for him when life is going good. And when life has you literally strapped to a bed, ventilators coming out of you, drainage tubes, like so many IVs, I couldn't even count them. And you're seeing like delirium hallucinations. You have no control over that situation. Right. The only thing you have is God. I don't know how people do it without him. I really don't. That resolved itself within about 36 hours, but it was really intense delirium for only about 12, I would say. And then it just became a daily get a little better, get a little better, get a little better. And my nurses that I had were incredible. They were godly women, which just, I haven't ever really experienced that a lot in hospitals. Like I've never really experienced a hospital that openly shares its faith. And there were so many nurses that if I mentioned God to them, they would be like, absolutely. And they would tell me their faith and they would tell me, yes, draw from that strength. And so they really were encouraging in ways that I really have never been used to before in a hospital setting. And I, again, feel like it was completely God that he just really surrounded me with amazing caretakers who believed in him and could rally around me and show me Jesus's hands and feet when I was kind of in a place where I really needed to see it. Yeah. So I got released after just a week, which was crazy.
And because they had told you to expect to be in ICU for 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And then step down
for like another like week, something like that. Yeah. It was a long time. And I walked within the first 24 hours and just every step like was really just trying to get like better. Cause as soon as I could get home, I wanted to get home. And so they released me after a week. We went to our rental house.
After a week. So you went from ICU to step down in 1 week when that you were supposed to be there at least 3 weeks, if not more.
Right.
Which is in 1 week, you busted out.
Yes. Busted out. Busted out. Like, what's so funny is, again, like I was so overwhelmed when I left and scared. Yeah. And like, it was like leaving your safety blanket, like your safety net. Like they wheeled me out. I was crying so hard in the elevator that my mask was like sucking in and sucking out, sucking in and sucking out. Like I was like heaving, and these poor women who had just gotten on the elevator, like stepping away from me because they were just like, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong with her. And like, we gotta get away. She's like having a meltdown. But I was scared. It was scary to leave so quickly. Because transplant literally takes you to death's door. Like your body, you come out of it and you've been like virtually on the edge of death just to get that heart. And then your body has to learn how to like pump, and it doesn't have to learn how to walk again, obviously, but just the motion of walking is just so difficult. Everything is so hard after transplant, which is weird. And I don't really 100% understand it, but you feel like you have about 10 bricks on your chest. And anytime you walk, there's something called denervation where the nerves in my heart were completely severed. They cannot attach those back. So my heart works separate from my brain. Like if you were to be sitting here and someone jumped around the corner and screamed boo, you would have a heart reaction. Your heart would speed up, like it would scare you. My heart does not do that anymore. So cardiac rehab is helping my heart learn how to talk with my brain, but it will never have an emotional response. It will never have like I get scared or I get happy or, something overwhelms me. And so my heart like instantly jumps in rhythm. And so instead it pounded a lot. Like it was really like if I got up and walked, it didn't realize it was supposed to be increasing to walk.
Get the blood flow going.
Right.
More.
And so when it finally realized that like my organs are needing more blood, then it kicks in and it kicks in really hard and it's pounding. So it feels really scary to leave a hospital when you feel like your heart's not really beating the way your heart used to be, if that makes sense.
Is that because it was a younger heart and it was stronger?
No, it's because it literally is just because it no longer has a nervous system attached to it. Like the nerves are no longer attached. And so it's just learning how to function in its new home.
Okay.
And it just takes your heart a while to figure out its new role.
Wow.
And so, so I went home back to the bungalow, little apartment place with some fears, and I started really just approaching God with those, like fear, like, oh God, I'm scared of this. I'm scared of that. I'm scared of this. And it really just occurred to me, like, I don't just need to be going to God with my fear. I need to be going to God with my trust as well. Like, I am scared of this, but I trust you in this process. Like, God, this is what I want in this situation, but I trust you in this process. And I really feel like sometimes when we are going through a battle, and we feel like our prayers are hitting the ceiling over and over again, or we feel like we're so scared that prayer seems overwhelming, I really encourage people to do it anyway. And even if it feels like it's hitting the ceiling, just my biggest encouragement is just pray, even though your heart may not be feeling it. Pray to God, pray for wisdom, pray for peace, and pray with gratitude and trust, and petition your requests. And I had a pastor years ago, Keith Moore at Dogwood Church. And I'm not going to say this as eloquently as he always said it, but he said, God does things when we pray that he doesn't do when we don't pray. And I do feel like there is a lot of wisdom in that, is that always petition God, always say, look, like, I want your will to be done. This is what I'd like for it to be. But then you have to also go in to say, but I trust you. And like, you can always present what you want, but always know, ultimately trust God, because he is going to guide you through a situation. And like I said, they all turn out different. You may be praying for one thing, God may change it in a different way. That doesn't mean that years down the road, it's not going to be exactly what you needed. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but it's just like with transplant. It was a hard pill for me to swallow that I was going to have a transplant, because I prayed for years for God to spare me from that. Please don't let me have a transplant. Let's just kick this can down the road as far as I can. And
for years you prayed that he would at least postpone it until Chloe went to college.
Right. Which he did.
And keep the dog alive until Chloe went to college, which he did that too.
Yeah, he did.
So, I mean, that night when you called, we talked about that. Like, remember God's faithfulness.
Yes.
That this is also an answer to prayer, even though it seems scary what tomorrow looks like. We have to reflect back on the things that we did ask of him, and we prayed specifically.
Exactly.
God, allow Chloe to not have to be in the middle of this. Let her get to college before this happens. And that was just another reminder.
And he did.
That he did.
And he did. And like I said, it's not always, we don't always get every prayer answered, but he answers them in ways that eventually work out for his glory, for our benefit, for just ultimately you just learn so much. Like, I have learned so much about faith and trusting him. My spiritual walk is a completely different level.
Because, yes, it is.
Yes, because I always thought with my health, like, unfortunately, I feel like God really gets a hold of me with my health. Like that's how he uses to get my attention.
Yeah.
Because I am very much a go do it, I can do it kind of person.
Yeah.
And I guess
you don't know how to say no.
Yeah, well, I guess, but I didn't literally like cardiomyopathy wasn't bad enough. Apparently, I needed to be all the way at the bottom to get a transplant to really be like, you know what? Like, it's okay. Whatever God wants, this is his show to run. It's okay. And I really have got to that point where I feel like trusting God is not only my only option, but trusting God is the best option. Because when you trust God completely, the anxiety and the stress is greatly reduced. I can't say, I mean, we live in a fallen world. I can't say we're not ever going to have it again. Or there's not moments where I'm like, you know, there's anxiety, but it's so much more manageable when I know someone else is handling it for me, and that's God. And it's a very, I mean, it is, I know they say all the time to approach God in a childlike manner. And I really do feel like that's almost how you have to get with your own life, is that you're my father and you know what's best. And whatever that looks like, I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna trust you. And it's hard. And I think that a lot of people out there are probably going through their own battles, especially after the holidays. I mean, the holidays do not always bring out the warm and fuzzy for people. Families are hard. Families are difficult. They leave you with, you know, bruises and wounds sometimes after the holidays. And I feel like laying that down at God's feet and just knowing that your heavenly Father loves you more than anyone on this earth can. And he is wanting what's best for you. It's just whatever your battle is. And I know it's hard. Gosh, I know it's hard. Like, I feel like prayer is the number one way, even if you're not even good at prayer. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I stink at praying, or, you know, just talk to God. Like, just talk to him. Like, talk to him like you were talking to your best friend. Like, get in your car, talk to him while you're driving. People are just going to think you're talking on the phone with someone. You know, like,
get away with a lot more these days.
Years ago, like, people thought you were crazy if you were talking out loud in your car. Now they just assume you're on the phone. So,
and literally, you can put an earbud in the grocery store, walk down the aisle praying, and nobody knows that
exactly.
You're even. Yeah.
But I do feel like we think that prayer has to be this lofty, like eloquent thing, when really God just wants us to talk to him. He, you know, I always do recommend starting with praise. Like, I love to start prayer with praising God for what he has done, and then petitioning and talking to him about, so you can even say, like, thanks for letting me get up this morning. Like, thanks for opening my eyes and giving me air in my lungs. But today is hard. And this is what I'm thinking about right now. And this is what's on my heart. I think he's more than fine with that. I know I wrote some notes down here, and I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. Things I've realized. That's one of the things that I wrote down here. Things that I've realized about God during this whole process. And I think this kind of, again, applies to a lot of different people. I've realized God is not a vending machine. And I really thought that for a long time, I guess. Sorry. Am I like leaning?
You're good.
That I can't just go up to him and punch exactly what I want, because it's never going to look the way I want. And I think that once we can wrap our brains around the fact that, like, he is not, you know, you don't put in your quarter. Like, I went to church all month. Here's my quarter, and I want this thing out of it. It's not a bartering system, and he's not a vending machine. And I struggled with that, and I didn't even realize I struggled with that, if it made sense. Like, I did not realize how much I bartered, I guess. And I've realized that that's just not how God works. He is not a barterer. He does not reward us for our good behavior, because nothing we can do is going to justify him loving us. It's only his mercy. And so I have really come to a point where he's not a vending machine. And I really,
that's a big shift.
It is.
in your relationship.
It is, of just truly just allowing God to love you, warts, feathers, and all. Not feeling like, if I am good, then he'll reward me, because that's not the way he works. So, and at the same time, like, I'm not perfect, and see how much he's blessed me. And I can't even begin to, I don't have the words of how much he's blessed me. We got home in 7.5 weeks. Like, they told us the minimum was 3 months. We were home at 7.5 weeks. And in time that we missed, or that we didn't miss major holidays with our children, which was huge. I think they both really needed the stability, and it was a really hard time for both Haynes and Chloe both. Chloe, because she had to take the dog to college. That was a nightmare for her.
It kept your mind off
It
of
did.
it.
It did. But anyway, another thing I've learned is that God might not change your circumstances, but he will change you. And he did not change my circumstances. I still had to have a transplant. But he has changed me so much that literally, someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, if you had to have another one, would you do it? And I said, absolutely. Like, absolutely. If this one ever rejects and they say you need to go through this again, I would, because it's in God's hands. And if this one doesn't last forever, then God knows that. He knows exactly how long it's going to last, and he will take care of it from there. So it's not even something I worry about. And then also, just in the midst of your own battle, always be ready to minister to others, because I feel like, even just with like the nurses and the clinical workers and people like that, I started off with those little index cards. I would write down scripture verses on index cards and just give them out. And then you gave me those beautiful like scripture verse prayer things, and I handed those out. And they're just little scripture verses and encouragement for people, so that they can kind of, if they don't know God, they can just get some encouragement from that. Which again has made me realize that I have to be very present, and I have to step out of my comfort zone and share my faith, which is difficult, but that's still a learning process for me of I'm just an extreme introvert, and I am the person who can put my earbuds in at the grocery store and not talk to anybody and be more than happy with that. And I'm just realizing that I have to be very present, because I will miss opportunities that God puts in my path to share his love with someone else. And when those opportunities present, that I cannot back down, I cannot blame it on my shyness or my introvertedness or whatever. And I have to step out and truly share my faith. And that's something I'm still working on.
Well, I don't know. So some of our listeners know you personally. Some of them have never met you, but if you've known Andra before, then you knew what a godly woman she is, but was prior to the transplant. Now, what has been remarkable on this side of transplant is watching you and even talking with you. You're different.
Yeah.
You're totally different. Still life of the party.
Okay.
Still fun. But you're so different in such a deep way. Like life became very intentional and very purpose-filled for you. And over and over, I heard you say, I just want to make sure that the people that I come in contact with know Jesus. Your heart grieved from the moment, did this person whose heart I was getting, did they know Jesus? And you prayed for this long before this ever happened.
I did.
Which is, what an incredible gift that one day these people will know that about this, their loved one. But just to watch your passion for Christ come to fruition in a way that it wasn't before has been absolutely incredible. On the way here, I was thinking about just all that you have been through, and the question that some people might ask when they're going through hard things is why me? And the thing that God kept bringing back to mind for you with me was that he entrusted this to you because he knew you were going to be trustworthy with it.
Oh, wow. Thanks. That's
Well, and I think we all have that opportunity that he's going to entrust things to us, but are we trustworthy with what he's going to entrust to us? And you have been. And, it talks about he will work all things to the good for our good, for his glory. And sometimes we can get in the way of that. He will eventually, that process might take longer. But because you were so willing in the beginning to say, God, you get the glory for this. I know you're going to work it out however this looks. But we want you to have the glory, and we want everybody around to see you and to know you. And you have been trustworthy with this journey from the very beginning. And it has been inspiring to watch. It's continuing. Even as we hear your story today, it inspires me every time I hear it. I don't think I will ever get tired of hearing every detail of this story. It is so dear and so precious, but it's also so convicting and challenging because, like you said, everybody has their red balloon. Everybody has their own journey. And just to self-reflect for a second here with our listeners, that no matter what your journey is, am I trustworthy with what God has allowed me to go through? Doesn't mean he caused it.
Right.
Doesn't mean that he's punishing us.
Right.
But if he's allowed it, then there's a responsibility that he is waiting to see, am I going to step into?
Yes.
Am I going to be trustworthy with this situation to bring him glory, and that he will work for my good? And that is what you've done.
Well, thanks. It's still a process. I think one thing I'm being very intentional, I don't want that fire to burn out. And so I am staying in the word a lot more, and just trying to really be aware of opportunities. So, which I think, this time of year, there's a lot.
There's a lot of opportunities.
So
for you,
I know.
Opportunities everywhere.
Yeah, it's an opportunity. So, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So,
well, I mean, we're just giving God all the glory and praise for you sitting here today.
Absolutely.
I know a lot of us held our breath, and lots of people were praying very hard. I tell you what, having you go through that elevated all of our prayer life in many ways, and I don't say that in tongue in cheek. It was a very intense time of prayer, and blowing up Brian's phone.
Yes.
He was gracious with it.
He's been really amazing. I mean, that's a whole nother blessing that God has blessed me with an amazing husband who just would move heaven and earth to make my life even a fraction easier. And he just has been a rock through all of this. And I feel like, I finally have the energy to kind of, I did not realize how much he was doing, like how compromised I was. I did not realize that until after transplant, and I was able to start doing things and just realizing, gosh, like really let some things go, like, just stupid things, like just not cleaning the kitchen, or, being too tired to cook, or just like things that just are helpful, work-life balance. And it's just, I don't know. I just felt like I was always behind the 8 ball. Like, apparently taking a nap every afternoon really does not lend to getting stuff done. So I really worried I was going to miss my naps. Like, I was terrified I was going to miss them, but I don't miss them at all. Like, I just keep going. Like, I mean, I still take a nap every once in a while because naps are fun, but like, I don't have to have one. So that's good. But yeah.
Well, I love you. Our Choosing Him family loves you.
Well, thank you.
And we're very, very thankful to have you back.
I'm very thankful to be back. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing your journey, for being so vulnerable and throughout it, allowing us to walk with you and to see God in a different way than before.
Well, thank you. It's all God. So I'm telling you, he gets all the glory, and I'm very thankful. And I'm very thankful that he has carried me through this. Like, this is going to be one of those sands on the beach footsteps kind of moment, because I literally, either that or it's going to be a drag mark, because he drugged me kicking and screaming. I'm not sure how he's going to view it, but he definitely got me through it. So it's good.
Yeah. And for listeners, I think you could probably replay this whole podcast, and wherever you hear heart transplant, put a blank there and insert whatever journey is that you're going on. and going through or waiting for God to answer or seeing him answer in a way that you didn't pray or maybe didn't want. I would just encourage you to go back and through this, because Andra has laid out what the gospel is and what it is to walk by faith and not by sight. And I would just really encourage you to do that, because all of us, like Andra said before, I love the red balloon example.
Yeah.
We all have that. And not to minimize that all what Andra has been in, I think the best way to honor you is by honoring God is by reflection, looking at what does our life look like and how can we honor God through that. So we welcome y'all to 2024 to Act 2 podcast as we continue to share stories, allow people to see God in the middle of the stories. And we hope you'll continue to follow us as we give people a place to show God. And just remember, whatever your journey is, whatever your story is, you own it, you share it, and you let God use it. Happy New Year.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.